She was mocked the moment she stepped out of a budget cabin at Velmore Summit, Europe's most elite ski resort. Wrapped in a wrinkled coat, hand-me-down skis in tow, and a handmade hat that didn't belong in a world of fur stoles and designer goggles. Sierra Langford looked like a joke. They laughed live-streamed and humiliated her without mercy, never realizing she was a former Olympic hopeful, exiled by a scandal, engineered by the same dynasty mocking her now. But when she dared to ski Widow's Edge, Velmore's most dangerous slope, what followed was not a fall but a legend. This is the emotional story of how a forgotten girl in thrift store gear made the Alps bow, shattered the elites with silence, and reclaimed her worth with one perfect run. Keep watching. Justice has never looked this graceful. Velmore Summit did not welcome strangers. It perched on the edge of the world like a frozen crown, snow-draped, steeped in splendor, and ruthlessly curated. The wind here didn't howl. It whispered in designer tones, rustling mink trims and Montclair sleeves. Lift passes weren't bought, they were inherited. Every guest was a trust fund, a title, or a legacy draped in Prada goggles. And then, there was. Her Sierra Langford stepped off the budget shuttle alone, the door closing behind her with a thud that felt louder than it was. The snow crunched beneath her worn boots as she pulled her ski bag from the curb. Her coat white, once now creased with time, billowed slightly in the alpine breeze. A handmade wool hat hugged her head soft and slouchy, its yarn fraying at the crown. Someone snorted behind a latticed espresso bar near the entrance, who let the equipment handler onto the main slope. A low chuckle followed. She looks like she's here to sharpen skis, not ride them. Sierra said nothing. She adjusted the strap on her bag and kept walking her hazel eyes forward, calm and unbothered. But the insults clung like frost. Their glances didn't need translation. They said, wrong class, wrong coat, wrong girl. A group of guests stepped aside, not to make space but to avoid contamination. In a world stitched from velvet and ego, her presence was an uninvited crease in the fabric. Live-stream drones hovered above, capturing arrivals in slow motion for a private app where billionaires ranked fashion with swipeable cruelty. And there she was. Unranked, uninvited, undeniable. A tall man broke through the hush like a crack of sunlight on a glacier. Damian Blackwell, 28. Heir to Blackwell Holdings and CEO of Moran Technologies, sharp-jawed, snow-dusted, dressed in matte black gear that whispered wealth in every zip. His presence drew attention like gravity, and he was walking straight toward her. "Sierra," he said softly, wrapping an arm around her waist with the comfort of 1,000 previous moments. "You okay?" She nodded, her voice calm. "They're loud. They don't matter." But they did, because the crowd had gone still. The name Damian Blackwell had weight, and the girl in the wrinkled coat, she was now his girlfriend, whispers ignited, gasps, phones lifted. "That's her. You're kidding. She looks like a seasonal janitor." In the distance, a silver drone zoomed in on her boots. One of the laces frayed the sole, marked from years of wear. They didn't know she once stood on the Olympic shortlist, that her fall wasn't a failure, but a theft. Not yet. But soon this mountain would remember her name, because sometimes the girl in the quiet coat doesn't need to shout, she just needs to ski. From the balcony above the main terrace, Vivienne Rothschild watched the scene unfold like it was scripted for her amusement. The shimmering silver of her fox fur stole framed her smirk. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled into a sharp high ponytail, tight enough to hurt, just loose enough to look effortless. She sipped from a crystal flute, the champagne as cold as her expression. "That's the girlfriend," she said aloud. Just loud enough I thought Damian was dating royalty, not Salvation Army. A few sycophants laughed around her too, afraid not to. Sierra Langford stood below them, her breath fogging in the cold, her expression unreadable. She wasn't glaring, wasn't retreating, just being the worst offense of all in a kingdom built on performance. Vivienne descended the marble stairs like a swan on ice, each step a deliberate grace note. The crowd sensing drama gathered, phones were discreetly tilted upward, the app's live feed ticked up in viewers. So did the comments. "Who is she? Velmore's first charity case. That code is a crime." Damian turned as Vivienne approached his jaw, tightening. "Vivienne," he said curtly, "Oh, I'm sorry," she replied, mock surprised. "I thought she was your ski valet." She glanced at Sierra's coat again. "Or your little sister." Laughter bloomed like rot. Sierra didn't flinch. Damien moved to speak, but Sierra laid a hand on his wrist. Barely a touch. Her eyes met his. "Let it go." That restraint infuriated Vivienne more than any comeback ever could. "You're a disgrace to his legacy." She spat, voice, ringing like a crystal chime, dipped in venom. "That coat, those skis, did you dig them out of a dumpster?" The words hit harder than the snowflakes swirling around them. Sierra's father, miles away in Montana, watched it unfold on his cracked phone screen. The Wi-Fi was weak, the battery is low, but he saw everything. Every insult, every sneer, every laugh at his daughter's expense. His hand trembled against the chipped ceramic mug he held. His eyes didn't. On the mountain, the cruelty sharpened. Vivienne's entourage closed in. Brielle Monroe, the model, with more followers than conscience. Jackson Pierce, the trust fund, adrenaline junkie, and a swarm of velvet-coated heirs and heiresses, their ski gear worth more than Sierra's entire life savings. One of them, a red-lipped influencer with diamond snowflake earrings, tossed a designer glove at Sierra's feet. "Pick it up, sweetheart," she purred. "That's what ski valets are for." Sierra didn't move. Her breath clouded the air. Her hands stayed still at her sides. Her silence again, louder than any scream. Then she stepped over the glove and looked Vivienne straight in the eyes. No anger, no shame, just the kind of calm that makes thunder look insecure. An emotional story, unfolding one insult at a time. A touching story. Not because she broke down, but because she didn't. The snow at Velmore summit was pristine until it wasn't. Until a glove was thrown, until silence became a weapon. Until a girl in a second-hand coat stood unmoving while the world tried to dismantle her with laughter. And somewhere, someone pressed record phones rose like torches. Camera lenses focused not on the slope, but on the scene below. The gondola lifts. Screens blinked to life. Hashtags bloomed like frostbite across the internet. The comments streamed in faster than snow fell. Is she a contest winner or something? Damien lost a bet, right? Please tell me, this is a publicity stunt. A teen influencer live-streamed it all from her Swarovski-studded phone, giggling between sips of overpriced cocoa. I don't know who she is, but I'd be embarrassed to breathe the same air Sierra still hadn't moved. Not when a luxury ski pass was crumpled and thrown at her boots. Not when Jackson Pierce leaned in and said, "Your skis look like they came from a garage sale. You should try sledding instead." Not when a model in silver mirrored goggles whispered, "I thought Damien only dated women." Not goodwill mannequins, but someone was watching who did care. Her father? Back home in a cabin built with calloused hands and snow season paychecks, he watched it unfold. He recognized the coat. It had been hers since college. He remembered buying those skis secondhand, off a retiring racer. They were scratched but solid, just like Sierra. The camera zoomed in on her face. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even blinking. Her hazel eyes stayed fixed on something beyond them, all like she was seeing a finish line. No one else believed existed, and still, the crowd kept coming. A ski lift operator in a sleek branded jacket joined in his tone, dripping with condescension. "Miss, your equipment violates resort image standards. Maybe stick to the beginner slope." A few laughs rang out. A few more cameras tilted closer. He leaned in again. "We don't allow charity cases on Widow's Edge." His voice carried. The message was clear. She didn't belong. Not here, not in their world. And yet... Sierra adjusted her wool hat, brushed a snowflake from her sleeve, and gave him the smallest smile. Noted. From the other end of the slope, Damien watched helplessly. His fists clenched. His mouth was set in stone. His network of investors, media handlers, and silent partners buzzed in panic, warning him, "Distance yourself before it's viral." But he didn't move, because deep down, he knew something. No one else did. Sierra Langford wasn't here to blend in. She was here to make the mountain remember her. An emotional story carved out of silence. A touching story live-streamed around the world before the first turn was ever made. A single snowflake landed on the velvet shoulder of Vivienne Rothschild's coat. She didn't brush it away. Her attention was fixed on Sierra Langford, Standing there like a ghost from a forgotten village, outdated, unwanted, unshakable, Vivian's lips curled into something that resembled a smile, but felt more like a knife. "If you're really here to ski, sweetheart," she said, her voice rippling across the terrace, "then let's give the audience a show." The crowd stirred, her entourage leaned in, ski poles paused mid-air, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Vivian tilted her chin toward the towering slope beyond the ridge, the one few dared to mention, and even fewer dared to touch. "Widow's Edge," she said, "one run, just you, no escorts, no apologies." Yes. A hush fell like fresh powder. Sierra blinked once. "And if I do it," Vivian's voice was sugar and venom, "if you make it down without crashing, I'll issue a full apology. Public on video. I'll even donate 2 million euros to any charity you name." Murmurs rippled like an avalanche about to break. "But if you fail," Vivian added louder, "now you take off your gloves, kneel in the snow, and say to the press, 'I am not worthy of Damien Blackwell.'" The silence cracked. "No," Damien said sharply, stepping forward. "This is insane." Sierra touched his arm gently. "Let them talk." Vivian leaned closer. "Well," Sierra inhaled deeply. "If I win," she said, her voice like clean wind across the ridge, "you and everyone who mocked me, leave this mountain. No media spin, no press conference, just gone, and none of you ever say my name again." The stakes rippled outward like shockwaves through the snow. Phones were lifted, comments exploded. "She's insane. This will be brutal. Queen Vivian will destroy her." Vivian clapped her gloved hands mockingly. "Oh, I adore a good fairy tale. Shall we make it official?" A ski instructor, one of Vivian's silent collaborators, stepped forward and gave a low whistle. "Widow's Edge hasn't been skied this season. Conditions are difficult." He didn't mention the sheet of hidden ice rerouted into the course that morning. Didn't mention the loose snowpack. The sabotage was subtle, deadly but hard to trace. Vivian knew Sierra didn't, but she nodded anyway. A subtle breeze swept past, stirring the ends of her braid. The knit hat stayed firm on her head. The coat flapped slightly like a flag at half-mast. The resort's livestream viewership surged. "She's going to die on camera. Why is Damien letting her do this? Thrift Girl versus Widow's Edge. This is content." Back home, Sierra's father stood up. He dropped his mug. The ceramic shattered. His eyes didn't. On the mountain, the crowd buzzed. This wasn't just a ski run anymore. It was a duel. Dignity against dynasty, legacy against lies. A girl in a wrinkled coat had just drawn a line in the snow. Widow's Edge wasn't marked on the beginner's map. It wasn't advertised in glossy resort brochures or flaunted in influencer reels. No amount of luxury gear could prepare a skier for it. It was a ghost slope known only by whispered warnings and ski legends written in fractured bones and erased footage, and now the livestream had pinned it center stage because Sierra Langford had accepted the dare, not just accepted it, owned it. At the base of the slope, Damien Blackwell stood tense, his jaw locked as he ended a call from his board. They'd urged him no, begged him to intervene. This could become a PR disaster. What if she fell? What if she broke? What if she won't, he whispered to himself. But someone else was making sure she would. Up near the summit, a slope technician wearing the standard resort jacket discreetly adjusted a switchboard just off the course. This man wasn't just working for Velmoret. Today he was working for Vivian Rothschild. Lines were shifted, safety barriers realigned. The already treacherous path rerouted into patches of hidden ice and unstable terrain. The sabotage was precise. Legal deniability, deadly effect. Vivian watched it all unfold from her chalet's private monitor, sipping her third flute of Veuve Clicquot. Her eyes gleamed. "She'll be in the snow before the second turn," she said with a thin smile. "And Damien will finally see what kind of embarrassment he's clinging to." But Vivian hadn't read Sierra's file, hadn't studied her stats, hadn't learned the name that once graced junior championship banners from Montana to Switzerland, because she'd been too busy erasing her. Years earlier, Sierra Langford had been a rising star named to the Olympic development team at 19. Her style was effortless, grace wrapped in grit, until the day a doping test came back positive, a fabricated result, quietly arranged by a man with everything to lose if she made it to the podium. That man, chairman of the Ski Federation. And Vivian's father. The scandal derailed everything. Sponsors vanished. Teammates ghosted. Her name was scrubbed from forums, from trials, from history, but not from memory. Especially not her father's. He stood now thousands of miles away, hands pressed to the screen of his phone, his knuckles white. He recognized the mountain's curve, the way Sierra adjusted her stance in the starting gate, the way her fingers curled and flexed on her ski poles. She still remembers, he whispered. Sierra stared down the slope. From here, Widow's Edge looked less like a trail and more like a frozen cliff winding into mist. The trees below bowed under the weight of snow, like spectators bracing for the impossible. A drone buzzed overhead, a final comment rolled across the live feed. She's about to learn why it's called Widow's Edge. Sierra didn't blink. She pushed off her white coat, vanished into the blur, and the mountain held its breath. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then wind ice velocity. Sierra Langford shot down Widow's Edge like a whisper turned to thunder. The moment her skis touched snow, it was no longer a stunt. It was art. Her battered gear didn't matter. Her coat could have been stitched from clouds or rags. It was irrelevant. What mattered was how she moved, with a precision honed from years on, Montana slopes, not polished resorts. With instincts carved into her bones, the crowd at the base leaned in, phones rose. Even Vivian Rothschild sat up straighter in her chalet. She's not supposed to look like that. Why isn't she struggling yet? Wait, she knows what she's doing. At the first bend where the sabotage began, most amateurs would have lost control. The rerouted trail curved unexpectedly into a patch of black ice, near invisible under thin snow. But Sierra felt it, the shift in grain, the unnatural sheen. She dipped low, one ski feathering the edge, her body tucked tight, and then she spun, a full 360. Her braid lashed the air like a whip, her knit hat stayed firm, and when she landed, the mountain groaned with disbelief. Down at the base, a group of instructors watching from the training lodge stood, with their mouths slightly open. Did she just? She did. That's a razor edge eagle maneuver. She's not just good. The oldest among them whispered, she's elite. The next trap came fast. A jagged section of terrain, barely covered rocks packed with unstable snow, waited like a snare. Cameras zoomed in, expecting a fall. The crowd on the live stream fed off the suspense. This is it. She's going down. She has no idea what's coming, but Sierra floated. She didn't dodge, she danced. Her skis curved like ink on snow. Her movements were poetry. Each turn a lyric, each shift, a note only the mountain could hear. She leaned low, brushing the hazard with a daring edge that made pros wince. And then she soared. A ramp emerged from the blur of snow. Sierra launched into the air, not wildly, not clumsily. With purpose, she twisted once, twice, mid-air, her coat flaring like wings. Cameras struggled to keep up. Viewers screamed into their phones. One drone nearly missed the shot. She landed clean. No stumble, no wobble, only grace. At the base, silence fell like snow. Vivian's champagne glass tipped forgotten. Damian Blackwell's eyes never left. Her Sierra Langford was no longer the girl in the thrifted coat. She was a storm. The final stretch loomed, an infamous hairpin curve known to end careers. Sierra didn't slow. She accelerated her skis, battered and scratched, sliced the ice like scalpels. The resort's sensors blinked to life, registering her velocity. Unmatched, unstoppable, 1 minute 47 2 seconds. Faster than any time in Velmore summit history. Sierra came to a clean stop at the base. No celebration, no arrogance, just breath visible in the air and hazel eyes scanning the crowd. The grandstands were silent. Phones lowered. Even Vivian's lips trembled. Because now they all knew. They hadn't watched a girl ski. They had witnessed a legend being written. An emotional story carved out of a mountain of cruelty. A touching story told in snow silence and defiance. The silence was no longer cruel. It was stunned reverent, as if the mountain itself had fallen silent to honor her. Sierra Langford stood at the base of Widow's Edge, steam rising from her breath, her skis still humming from the friction of her record-breaking run. The timer above the slope flashed, 1:47:2, history. She didn't smile, she didn't cry. She simply was as steady and quiet as the pine trees flanking the summit, as sure as gravity, as unshakable as everything they had tried to deny her. The crowd, once a sea of mockery, stood frozen. Then came the first ripple. A clipboard clattered to the snow as a silver-haired coach, one of the resort's Olympic consultants, stepped forward. "I've coached world champions," he said, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "But what I just saw was once-in-a-generation talent." The applause began as a murmur. Then it swelled. Coaches, former pros, staff members, even a few of the same elite guests who had mocked her hours earlier. One by one, they clapped slowly at first, then with force. The live stream exploded. "She's not a fluke. This girl should have been in the Olympics. I'm crying. I judged her, and I was wrong." Vivian Rothschild's voice cut through this chaos, sharp and desperate. "This doesn't change anything." But no one listened. Sierra stepped forward. Her knit hat was slightly askew. Her coat is still wrinkled. Her presence is now undeniable. She took the mic offered to her, its handle cold in her fingers, and her voice was calm, but it rang like a bell in a cathedral. "My name is Sierra Langford," she began. "When I was 19, I was removed from Olympic contention after a failed doping test." The crowd shifted uneasily. "I didn't fail that test. The results were fabricated by a man who didn't want someone like me on the team." Her eyes landed unshaken on Vivian Rothschild. "Your father?" gasps rippled. "My career was stolen. My name is buried. I didn't come here for revenge. I came to ski." She paused. "Let that hang. I don't need gold medals to prove I belong. I needed this mountain, and I needed you." Her voice flicked like ice to see that. "What you wear, what you own, who your family is, none of it defines worth." She handed the mic back, walked away. But her words stayed. Vivian's hands clenched at her sides, her expression twisted. But there was no recovering. The mountain had spoken, and it did not favor the entitled. At the edge of the crowd, Damian Blackwell moved to meet Sierra. He didn't say a word, just took her hand and kissed her forehead. She leaned into him, eyes closed for just a second. And the mountain watched, and the world listened. An emotional story, born in silence and spoken with truth. A touching story where justice didn't shout, but echoed. Vivian Rothschild stood still, her breath fogging in front of her, but her world dissolving behind her fur-lined mask. Her power wasn't built for this, not for public exposure, not for a name like Sierra Langford to echo louder than Rothschild, on a mountain where her family had long ruled with velvet invitations and silent fear. Now her father's sins were no longer whispered. They were broadcast. Her name trended, but not in admiration. And then came the final blow. Damian Blackwell stepped up to the mic, not with fury, but with certainty. As of this moment, he said, his voice like a gavel, "Blackwell Holdings is terminating all financial partnerships with the Rothschild banking network. Every resort, every development under our name will no longer recognize or welcome Vivian Rothschild." The air collapsed around her. "Noah?" she gasped, stepping forward. "You can't, Sierra," he said without looking at her. "Her name is Sierra." And that was the end of it. Vivian's supporters vanished as quickly as they had gathered. Her entourage of influencers melted into the snow. Brielle Monroe lowered her diamond goggles and turned away, her PR manager already whispering, "Damage control." Jackson Pierce removed his goggles, face pale, and slid back into the crowd. The instructor who had rigged the slope was escorted off the property, his badge stripped from his coat, his access revoked before sunset. It wasn't a scandal. It was a reckoning. Sierra stood back, not smiling, not gloating, just still. She watched it unfold with the same calm she wore at the top of Widow's Edge. Not one word of revenge passed her lips. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about removal. The kind that clears rot from timber, that strips away pretense and leaves truth, exposed, raw, unyielding, and righteous. The crowd, once drunk on ridicule, now stirred with something unfamiliar: respect. A young resort worker who had stayed quiet through it all now approached. She was maybe 20. Her uniform was crisp but plain. She looked down at her boots when she spoke. I was wrong to say nothing. She said softly, "You shouldn't have had to stand alone." Sierra smiled gently. "I didn't, because even though they mocked her, live-streamed her, tried to break her, they couldn't touch her foundation. The thing stitched in silence by her father's hands, by her own grit, by a truth too big for gold medals. The mountain no longer belonged to the elite. It belonged to the one woman who reminded them what earning it really meant. An emotional story where strength wasn't shouted but revealed. A touching story where dignity shattered dynasties. The air at Velmore summit had changed. Gone was the chill of arrogance that once hung like a second atmosphere over its slopes. Something softer took its place, a collective breath, a reluctant awe. The kind of silence that follows a storm, not because it ended, but because it reshaped the land. And in the center of it all stood Sierra Langford, still wearing her wrinkled white coat, still wrapped in a knit hat that looked more like memory than fashion. She hadn't raised her voice once, but the mountain had heard her. One by one, the silence began to break. First came a young skier, barely 16, her cheeks pink from cold and shame. She approached Sierra slowly holding a steaming mug of cocoa like an offering. Her voice was barely a whisper. I reposted one of the live stream clips. I added a laughing emoji. Sierra turned her hazel eyes gentle. The girl's voice cracked. I'm sorry I deleted it. You're what this mountain should stand for. Sierra didn't nod, didn't need to. Her presence forgave without theatrics. Behind her more came forward. A lift operator stepped out of his booth, removing his hat. They told me not to say anything earlier. He muttered, eyes on the snow. But I've never seen anyone ski Widow's Edge like that. Never a coach, the same one who'd once refused Sierra's application to train at Velmore, stood with his hands behind his back, humbled. You should have been at the Olympics, he said. We failed you. And Sierra, always still, always steady, simply replied, not forever. Further back, the grandstands began to empty. Those who had come to laugh at her were now walking away quietly, avoiding cameras. Their designer jackets and $1,000 boots suddenly felt like costumes at the end of a bad play. Vivian Rothschild had disappeared. Her fur hat was left behind, half buried in snow. The live stream kept rolling, but now the captions had changed. Sierra reigns, Velmore belongs, ta si west, iwo. Her. This is what grace looks. Like the video of her descent had already gone viral, millions of views within the hour. Someone had edited it to classical music, overlaying her aerial spin with swelling violins. The title, Never Judge a Skier by Her Gear. Sierra's father back home in Montana sat watching it all from his battered laptop. His calloused hands trembled, not from fear, but pride. His little girl had skied a run so pure it had made the world stop. He closed his eyes just for a second, then whispered, she did it. The mountain had changed. It wasn't in the slope or the snow, but in the eyes of those who stayed behind. They looked at Sierra now, not as a curiosity, not as a joke, but as a compass of grit, of grace, of what it means to belong, not by bloodline or bank account, but by worthiness. An emotional story, not just about vindication, but restoration. A touching story where silence gave birth to thunder. The leaderboard at Velmore Summit had never been updated in real time until now. The digital screen above the lodge shimmered, its numbers blinking as the crowd looked up, breath suspended. Widow's Edge record, Sierra Langford, 1:47.2. There was no ceremony, no gold confetti, no champagne shower. Just the quiet murmur of realization sweeping over the crowd like a snowdrift. This girl in her thrifted coat and hand-knit hat had redefined everything they thought mattered, and she did it with borrowed skis. Sierra stood beside Damian Blackwell near the slope's base, fingers lightly intertwined with his, their shoulders brushing like a promise. You didn't need to prove anything. He murmured, voice low enough that only she heard. Not to them, not to me. Her hazel eyes softened. I wasn't skiing for them. She said I was skiing for every girl they tried to erase. A camera zoomed in, not to mock her, but to capture that look, the kind of expression that doesn't shout victory, but breathes it, quietly, eternally. As the sun dipped behind the Alps, painting the slopes in gold, coaches approached Sierra. Not for interviews, not for social gain, but out of respect, real respect. One whispered, if you ever want to train again. Another simply said, you're the best we've seen. But Sierra just nodded. She wasn't there to climb back into a system that once broke her. She had already built something higher. her own legend stitched from humility and defiance. Back inside the chalet, her phone buzzed with messages from strangers. "You made me cry. I wore my sister's coat to school today. I thought it made me less. Not anymore. Thank you for not giving up. I showed my daughter your run. She wants to learn to ski now." 1,000 strangers now carried her story like a torch. Not because she wore designer gear, but because she didn't. Not because she fit in, but because she rose above. And as the live stream ended, the final scene lingered Sierra walking toward the edge of the lodge. Looking out over the slopes, her knit hat slightly crooked, the breeze tugging at her coat. Behind her, the elite fell silent, not out of fear, but reverence. Because when a woman rises without screaming, when she wins with integrity instead of spectacle, something in the world shifts. Velmore Summit was no longer just a playground for the rich. It was a monument to grit, to grace, to a girl in a wrinkled coat who made the mountain bow. An emotional story, not because she conquered the slope, but because she never let it conquer her. A touching story, because dignity always finds its way home. Sierra Langford didn't need luxury gear, a famous name, or approval from the elite. What she carried was far rarer grit forged in silence, strength wrapped in dignity, and a fire they couldn't burn. With one breathtaking run, she didn't just break records. She shattered an entire hierarchy built on wealth and cruelty. Her story isn't just about skiing, it's about justice, it's about identity, and it's about the quiet power of those who rise without applause until they make the world listen. As a former Olympic coach, I've trained champions for 2 decades, and I can say with confidence Sierra Langford's performance wasn't just athletic excellence, it was emotional precision, poise under pressure, and proof that the most powerful victories don't come with medals. They come with truth. If this emotional story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you to never underestimate the quiet ones, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing real, raw, and touching stories like this to light, and tell us in the comments. What would you have done if you were Sierra? Thank you for watching.